There is a saying among the older species of the galaxy, passed down through 1,000 cultures and 1,000 languages, that some doors are best left closed. On the day this story begins, that saying had a name attached to it. That name was Earth. The lecture hall on Varena's station was shaped like an amphitheater. Its walls curved and dark, lit only by the soft blue glow of the star charts projected above the central podium. Rows of students sat in silence, dozens of species packed shoulder to shoulder, feathers brushing against scales, chitin clicking against smooth pale skin. It was a class on galactic survivability, a mandatory course for anyone hoping to work in exploration, diplomacy, or colonization. The professor was a Threnai, a tall insectoid being with compound eyes that shimmered violet under the lecture lights, and a voice that clicked and hummed in a way the station's translators smoothed into something almost musical. His name was Instructor Vel Ather Rowe, and he had been teaching this course for 11 cycles. He was good at his job. He knew the statistics cold, knew the death tolls, knew the horror stories that made freshman students go pale on their first day. He had built his reputation on being blunt, on never softening the truth for the sake of comfort. Space did not care about comfort, and neither did he. That morning, the star chart above the podium rotated slowly, systems blinking in soft light, some marked green for habitable, some yellow for hazardous, and a small cluster near the edge of the projection marked in a deep, warning red. Vel Ather Rowe gestured toward the red cluster with one clawed hand. "Today," he said, "we conclude our unit on unlivable worlds, and I want to end as I always do with the worst of them. The list changes some semesters. New surveys come in, old data gets revised. But there is one entry that has held its position for the last 6 cycles running. Number 1 on every reputable index of hostile, unsurvivable environments in this quadrant." He tapped a control on the podium. The projection zoomed, the red cluster expanding, until a single blue and green sphere rotated above the class, deceptively pretty, wrapped in wisps of white cloud. "Sol 3, he said, designated by its inhabitants as Earth. A low murmur ran through the room. Most of the students had heard of it. Everyone had heard of it. DAS. It was the planet every cadet joked about, the one every exploration corps used as a cautionary tale, the one that had swallowed entire survey teams and spat back nothing but wreckage and silence. "Let us review why," the instructor continued, and his mandibles clicked together in something like grim satisfaction. Gravity. Roughly one standard, survivable, yes, but paired with an atmosphere so saturated with reactive oxygen that unprotected exposure causes cellular degradation in most known species within minutes. A magnetic field, strong enough to scramble low-grade shielding. Weather patterns that generate cyclonic storms wide enough to swallow moons. Lightning strikes that could vaporize a shuttle, and temperature swings capable of freezing or boiling exposed flesh within the same 24-hour cycle depending on latitude. He clicked through the projection, and a series of images flashed above the podium, roiling storm systems the size of continents, cracked deserts, ice fields littered with the remains of unfortunate expedition pods. Den. A wall of dark water rising impossibly high before crashing down on a rocky shoreline. "And that," he said, "is before we discuss the wildlife." More murmurs. Somebody in the back row made a small, strangled noise. Predatory apex species measured in the thousands, many capable of ending a fully grown Threnai in a single strike. Microscopic organisms so aggressive and so adaptable that 3 known survey teams were wiped out, not by claws or fangs, but by invisible infection, dead within days of first contact. The dominant species itself, the ones who call themselves human, evolved in the middle of all of this, not above it, not shielded from it, in it. He let that sentence hang in the recycled air of the lecture hall. "Every reputable index," he said again, "lists Earth as the single most lethal, most unlivable world, with an active indigenous spacefaring population in this arm of the galaxy. It is not a place you survive by chance. It is not a place you build a colony by accident. If you find yourself stranded there without extensive preparation, the statistical likelihood of survival beyond one local week is less than 4%. He paused, letting the number sit heavy over the room. 4%, he repeated, for adults, trained, equipped, adult members of the Survey Corps wearing standard environmental gear. The room was silent. Students shifted in their seats. A Dravith cadet near the front made a soft, uneasy sound low in his throat, the kind of sound his species made when confronted with something they found instinctively terrifying. It was into that silence that a hand went up. It was near the back of the hall, raised without hurry, without drama. It belonged to a young woman with brown hair pulled into a loose braid, sitting quietly in a seat she'd chosen specifically because it was out of the way. She hadn't spoken much. In this class, she rarely spoke much in any class. Her name, according to the roster, was Mara Whitlock, human exchange student, admitted under the new Coalition Education Exchange Program that had only been running for the last 2 cycles. Most of her classmates had barely registered. She was there. She was quiet. She did her work. She sat in the back. If asked to describe her, half the room would have struggled to remember anything more specific than the human girl, said with the faint, unplaced unease that many species still carried about her kind, an unease built entirely out of statistics like the ones the instructor had just recited. Vel Atherow's compound eyes swiveled toward her. Mildly surprised, questions during his lectures were common. Questions from the human exchange student were not. She had been the quietest presence in the room all semester. "Yes," he said. "You have a question about the data." "Not really a question," Mara said. Her voice was calm, even, almost gentle. "Just wanted to mention, I grew up there." The room went very still. "I'm sorry," the instructor said. "Earth," Mara said. "I grew up there, on the planet you're describing." A ripple went through the class, 100 small sounds, feathers rustling, claws tapping against desks, a low collective intake of breath from creatures with lungs built for it. Every head turned toward her. "You grew up there," Vel Atherow repeated slowly, as though testing the words for some hidden flaw. "Yes," Mara said. "Outside a small town, farm country mostly. Forests on one side, a river on the other. Lots of open sky. The 4% survival statistic I just cited," the instructor said, "applies to trained adult survey professionals with full environmental equipment." "I know," Mara said. "I didn't have any of that." She said it simply, without boast, the way someone might mention they'd once owned a particular kind of car. "I was a kid," she continued. "We didn't wear suits. We didn't carry shielding. We just went outside and played." The Dravith cadet in the front row turned fully around in his seat to stare at her, his throat sac puffing out in visible distress. "Played?" Vel Atherow said. "Yes, on Earth, yes." "You are telling this class," the instructor said, his voice climbing very slightly, the clicks in his speech coming faster, "that as an unprotected juvenile of your species, you engaged in recreational activity within an environment that this course and every verified index in coalition space classifies as actively lethal to trained adult professional." "I mean, when you put it that way, it sounds dramatic," Mara said. "But yeah, pretty much." Nobody in the hall said anything for a long moment. Somewhere near the middle rows, a small clawed hand slowly lowered itself back down after having been raised to ask an entirely different question, its owner apparently deciding this new topic was far more urgent. Vel Atherow set down the small pointer device he had been holding. He did this carefully, the way a person sets something down when they need both hands free to process what they are hearing. "Explain," he said. "For the benefit of the class, and admittedly for my own benefit, please explain what a childhood recreational activity looked like on a planet with weather capable of destroying settlements, wildlife capable of killing your entire species' apex predators, and a biosphere that has ended professional survey missions through infection alone." Mara considered the question. She didn't look nervous. She didn't look proud, either. She looked like someone being asked to describe an ordinary Tuesday. "Okay," she said. "So where we lived, there was a river about a 10-minute walk from the house. In summer, the water got high and fast from the mountain runoff. We used to jump in it. Float down to the bend where it got calm, climb out, walk back up, do it again. The river, the instructor said carefully, the one you have just described as fast-moving and originating from elevated terrain runoff. Yeah, it had a strong current. You had to be careful of the rocks. And the local wildlife in this river system? Snapping turtles mostly, some snakes. A few times we saw what our parents called gators further downstream, but not where we swam. The word gators meant nothing to the translator, apparently, because it rendered as a raw, untranslated sound, and Vel Atherro's antennae twitched as though the untranslated word itself carried some instinctive warning. There were also, Mara added, almost as an afterthought, black bears in the woods behind the house. We used to make a lot of noise walking through there, so we wouldn't surprise one. My brother got chased once. He was fine. He just ran. And I remember thinking it was kind of funny at the time. In hindsight, it probably wasn't that funny, but we were kids. A student 3 rows down, a small furred creature with enormous nervous ears, made a soft whimpering sound and put a paw over her face. Bears! Vel Atherro said. The apex predators. One kind of them, sure. There's a bunch of different ones depending where you are. Where I grew up, it was mostly black bears. My cousins further north had to deal with the bigger ones. And further north than that, polar bears. But those live near the ice, so it's a whole different set of problems up there. Colder, for one. You are describing this, the instructor said, his voice climbing again, as a geography lesson. I mean, it kind of is one, Mara said. Earth's pretty big. Different parts of it try to kill you in different ways. The class had gone from silence to something closer to a held breath, a room full of beings from a dozen different worlds, absolutely riveted, uncertain whether they were witnessing bravery, insanity, or simply a species so alien in its baseline assumptions about danger that ordinary conversational categories failed to apply. Continue, Vel Atherro said, and his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. It had the careful, controlled tone of someone conducting a very dangerous experiment. Tex, winters were the scary part, honestly, Mara said, warming slightly to the topic now. The way anyone does when asked to reminisce, not because of animals, because of the cold. Cass. It got down low enough that if you weren't dressed right, you could lose fingers. Toes. We had a saying, if your skin turns white and hard and you can't feel it, that's frostbite. Get inside now. We used to have snow days where the whole town would just stop because the roads were too dangerous to drive. And you went outside anyway. Oh, all the time. We built forts out of the snow, had snowball fights. Went sledding down this one hill that had a pretty nasty drop-off at the bottom. If you didn't bail in time, you'd go straight into the tree line, which, yeah, a couple kids broke arms doing that over the years. Broken bones, the instructor repeated, were an accepted risk of the recreational activity. I mean, nobody wanted it to happen. But yeah, it happened sometimes. That's kind of just what being a kid was like. And the storms, Vel Atherro said, gesturing weakly toward the projection still hovering above the podium, the image of the continent swallowing cyclone frozen mid-display. The cyclonic systems capable of erasing settlements. Hurricanes, you mean? Or tornadoes? Different things. We didn't get many hurricanes where I was. That's more of a coastal thing. But we got tornadoes sometimes in spring. There's a siren that goes off in town when one's coming. You're supposed to get to a basement or a storm shelter. Supposed to. Most people did. Some people, and I'm not saying this was smart, some people used to go stand on their porches and watch them come in, film them on their phones. There's a whole, I don't know if you'd call it a subculture, but there's a whole group of people back home whose entire hobby is chasing tornadoes, driving toward them on purpose, trying to get close enough to study them. The Threnai instructor's mandibles clicked together several times in rapid succession. A sound the class had learned over the semester indicated he was struggling to formulate a response. They chased them, he said finally. For science, mostly. Some of them just like the thrill of it. On purpose. On purpose. And your government permits this. I mean, it's not like anyone's stopping them. It's a free country. If you want to go do something wildly dangerous for fun, that's kind of your business, as long as you're not hurting anyone else. A low, disbelieving hum rippled through several rows of the class simultaneously. A sound that in at least 3 different species' vocal ranges roughly translated to something like, "Are you kidding me?" Vel Atherrow pressed both clawed hands flat against the podium, steadying himself, and looked out at his student with an expression that, on an insectoid face, was difficult to read, but carried the unmistakable weight of a man recalculating every assumption he had built his career on. "I would like to return," he said slowly, "to your opening statement. You said you did this for fun. Yeah, not out of necessity, not because you lacked the resources to live otherwise, not because your settlement was under some kind of survival pressure that forced children into dangerous activity. No, we had houses, eating food. It wasn't like that. That's what kids did. You went outside. You played by the river, you played in the woods, you played in the snow. Every kid I knew did some version of it. It wasn't considered dangerous exactly. It was just Tuesday. It was just Tuesday, the instructor repeated, very quietly, as though the phrase itself required careful, cautious handling like a live wire. I mean, obviously, kids got hurt sometimes. Broken bones, stitches. One kid down the road lost half a finger in a fishing accident, but nobody thought of it the way you're describing it. Like a war zone. It was just where we lived. You learn the rules early. Don't swim past the rope. Don't go in the woods without telling someone. Check for ticks after. Stuff like that. Ticks, small parasites. They can carry diseases. You have to check your skin after being outside and pull them off if you find them. Somewhere in the 3rd row, a student with pale, delicate scales visibly shuddered and pulled his own arms tighter around himself, as though checking for hypothetical parasites right there in his seat. Vel Atherrow took a slow breath, the kind that in his species involved a visible expansion of the thorax, and tried, visibly, to reassert some control over the direction of the lecture. "Let us be clear," he said, addressing the class now more than Mara directly, though his eyes never left her. "What we are describing here is not evidence that Earth is, in fact, survivable. What we are describing is evidence of something else entirely. A species that either does not register danger the way the rest of the galaxy does, or one that has been so thoroughly shaped by constant low-grade lethal exposure across its entire evolutionary history that ordinary hazard responses have been, in effect, recalibrated to a baseline the rest of us would consider suicidal." "That sounds about right," Mara said, nodding agreeably, as though he just complimented her cooking. "That is not a compliment," the instructor said. "I know, but it's still accurate." A few students laughed, a nervous, uncertain sound, the kind of laugh that comes out when a room isn't sure if it's allowed to find something funny yet. "May I ask a follow-up question?" said a student near the middle of the hall. A tall, willowy being with silver-blue skin and large, luminous eyes, one of the more talkative members of the class, who had until this point mostly used her question time to challenge the instructor's data sourcing. "You mentioned tornado chasers, people who pursue the storms for study or thrill. Is this a fringe activity, or is it representative of some broader cultural attitude?" Mara thought about it for a second. "It's not everyone," she said. "But it's not nothing, either. We've got people who climb mountains without oxygen, at altitudes that kill about 1 in every few hundred who try. We've got people who free dive, no tank, just holding their breath, down into deep ocean trenches where the pressure alone can collapse your lungs if you don't know what you're doing. We've got people who wingsuit off cliffs, basically strapping fabric to their arms and legs and jumping, hoping the fabric catches enough air before the ground does. We've got people who volunteer to study active volcanoes up close. All of that stuff exists. Not everyone does it. But enough people do it that it's, a known thing. A category of hobby." "A category," the silver-blue student repeated faintly. "There's specialty stores for the gear." The instructor made a sound that might have been a laugh if Threnai physiology permitted laughing, but came out instead as a kind of strangled, clicking wheeze. "I want to return the conversation to something resembling academic structure," he said, though his voice carried noticeably less authority than it had at the start of the lecture. You have described, in the span of a few minutes, an environment featuring lethal predators, life-threatening weather, disease-bearing parasites, and a cultural relationship with mortal danger that appears to treat it as recreation. I would like an honest assessment from you, not as a defense of your homeworld's reputation. An honest assessment. Is Earth dangerous? Mara paused before answering. It was the first time in the whole exchange she had actually paused, and something in her face shifted, just slightly. The easy conversational warmth giving way to something a little more grounded, a little more serious. "Yeah," she said. "It's dangerous. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it isn't. People die there, kids die there sometimes, and that's the worst part of it. The part nobody likes to talk about at parties. Storms kill people. Animals kill people. Disease kills people. Cold kills people. Heat kills people. It's a genuinely, seriously dangerous place to live, and I'm not trying to make a joke out of that." She let that sit for a second, and the room, which had been riding a current of nervous laughter, went quiet again, sobered. "But," she continued, "here's the thing your indexes don't really capture. Dangerous isn't the same as unlivable. We didn't evolve somewhere safe and then get dropped into all that chaos unprepared. We evolved in it. Every single one of my ancestors, going back further than anyone can really track, lived through some version of that river. Those woods, those winters. The ones who couldn't handle it didn't get to have kids. So by the time you get down to me, you're looking at the end result of a few 100,000 years of the planet, trying to kill every single person in my family tree, and every single one of them finding a way to not die. That's not recklessness. That's just what we are. We're really, really good at surviving Earth. We've been training for it the entire time our species has existed. Nobody spoke. B. That's why your 4% number doesn't mean what you think it means," she added. "It's measuring outsiders. People who show up with no context, no instincts, no generational knowledge of what the ground and the sky and the water are going to do to them. Of course, that's lethal. You're describing what happens to a species meeting Earth for the first time. That's not what it's like for us. For us, it's home." Vel Atheroe stood very still at the podium for a long moment. His compound eyes fixed on her, his mandibles motionless. "You said your brother was chased by a bear," he said finally in a quieter voice. "Yeah, and you found that amusing. At the time. Look, we'd both grown up, hearing what to do if you saw one. Don't run, actually. That's the thing everyone gets wrong in the stories. You're supposed to back away slowly and make yourself look big. My brother panicked and ran. Anyway, bear didn't even chase him that far. Honestly, it was more curious than aggressive. Black bears mostly are, unless you get between a mother and her cubs. But my brother didn't know that in the moment. He was like 9, so he just bolted, and I was standing there yelling at him to stop running, because I'd actually paid attention in the safety talk, and he wouldn't listen, and afterward we laughed about it for years. Still do, actually. He brings it up every Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving. Holiday. Different topic. The instructor rubbed one clawed hand slowly across the ridge of his head, a gesture the class had learned meant he was experiencing something close to what humans might call headache if Threnai got headaches. "I confess," he said, "that I do not know how to properly categorize what you have just told this class. On one hand, everything in the verified data remains true. Earth is lethal, the wildlife is lethal, the weather is lethal, the biosphere is lethal. None of that has been contradicted." "Nope," Mara agreed. "It's all true. And yet you are describing surviving, and even enjoying, exposure to nearly every one of these hazards, as an unequipped child, using nothing but what you call common sense, and apparently a few safety talks given by adults." "That's the part people miss," Mara said. "It's not that we don't respect the danger. We do. We just grew up with a really, really thorough education in it, starting basically as soon as we could walk. Don't touch the stove. Don't go near the river without an adult until you're old enough to swim well. Don't run from a bear. Back away. Check for ticks. Come inside when the siren goes off. Watch the sky. If it turns green, get to shelter. It's not that the danger isn't real. It's that by the time we're old enough to go play in it unsupervised, we've had years of training on how to not die in it. And even then, plenty of us still get hurt. We just don't let that stop us from living there. Because there's nowhere else to go. It's home. You don't get to opt out of your own planet. The silver blue-skinned student near the middle of the class raised her hand slowly, and when the instructor nodded at her, she asked, in a voice that had lost its earlier challenging edge and gained something closer to genuine unease, "Are all humans like this?" Mara actually laughed at that, a short, surprised sound. "No," she said. "I mean, kind of, but not exactly. Some people grow up in cities, never see a bear in their life, wouldn't know what to do with a river current if it bit them. It depends a lot on where you're from. I got the rural version of the childhood. Farm country, woods. My roommate back at the exchange program grew up in a city. She'd probably be just as lost out there as any of you would be. It's a big planet, lots of different versions of growing up on it. But the version you experienced," the instructor pressed, "was considered normal. For where I lived, yeah, pretty normal." And nobody intervened. No authority stepped in to prevent children from engaging in activities with this level of associated risk. I mean, there were rules. Parents worried, obviously. There were accidents that made the news, made everyone a little more careful for a while. But you can't wrap a whole childhood in padding just because the world's dangerous. At some point, you have to let kids learn how to live in it, or they never learn at all. And then they're worse off as adults. That's kind of the whole philosophy, if you want to call it that. You don't hide from the danger. You learn it. You respect it. And then you go live your life anyway. Velather Rowe was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted, the clicking cadence slower, more deliberate. The voice of a professional recalibrating an entire framework in real time in front of his students, which was, to his credit, something few instructors were willing to do. "I think," he said, "that I owe this class, and frankly myself, a revision to today's lesson." He turned toward the podium and pulled up the index again, the red cluster, Earth rotating serenely at its center, blue and green and utterly indifferent to the conversation happening about it. "The data is not wrong," he said. "Earth is, by every objective measurement available to this academy, among the most hostile environments to unprepared visitors in this quadrant of the galaxy. That statistic will not change today. What I think we have been missing, and what I suspect every index compiled by outside surveyors has been missing, is a distinction between a planet being unlivable and a planet being merely unforgiving to those who do not belong there." He looked at Mara. "You belong there," he said. "That is the difference, isn't it? Every survey team we send in is an intrusion, a guest arriving without invitation, without preparation, without generations of inherited knowledge about the water, the woods, the sky. You are not a guest on Earth. You are the reason it has a name at all." "That's a nicer way of putting it than I would have," Mara said, smiling slightly. "I would like to ask one final question," the instructor said. "And I would like an honest answer, not a diplomatic one." "Sure. Do you consider your homeworld to be dangerous, or do you consider the rest of the galaxy to simply be soft?" The room went dead silent, several students visibly holding whatever passed for their breath, waiting. Mara considered the question for a long moment, and there was no malice in her answer when it came. No arrogance, just the same calm, plain honesty she'd used the entire lecture. "Both, probably," she said. "Earth's dangerous. That part's true no matter how you slice it. But I've met people from a dozen different worlds since I started this program, and a lot of them, no offense to anyone in this room, panic over things that wouldn't even register back home. A little rain, a steep hill, a loud noise in the dark. It's not that they're weak, exactly. It's that their whole life, their whole species maybe, has been shaped by a place that doesn't ask much of them. Ours asked everything. Every single day for our entire history. So yeah, I think there's some truth to both halves of your question. Earth's brutal, and a lot of the galaxy just never had to find out what brutal actually looks like. Nobody in the room said anything for several seconds. The Dravith cadet in the front finally exhaled with a long, low sound of pure existential discomfort. The furred student with the big nervous ears had both paws pressed flat over her face. Now, peeking out from between her fingers as though watching something horrifying on a screen, the silver blue-skinned student was staring at Mara with an expression that had crossed somewhere from unease into something closer to awe. Velather rose straightened at the podium, and when he spoke again, there was a new note in his voice, something that hadn't been there at the start of the lecture. Respect, maybe. Or something adjacent to fear that had learned, very quickly, to dress itself up as professional curiosity. "Class," he said, "I believe we are going to need to revise several sections of the reading material for next semester. Possibly the entire unit." He looked at Mara one more time. "Thank you," he said, "for your contribution. I do not say this often, but I believe you have made this a more educational lecture than I had planned." "Happy to help," Mara said, and settled back into her seat, entirely at ease. As the rest of the class continued to stare at her, the way people stare at something they have just realized was never quite as harmless as it looked. The lecture ended a few minutes later, the instructor moving through the rest of his notes with noticeably less confidence than he'd started with, glancing occasionally toward the back row, as though checking that she was still real, still sitting there, still calmly taking notes like nothing unusual had happened at all. Word got around the academy quickly, the way it always does. By the end of the day, students who hadn't even been in that lecture hall were repeating the story in hushed, half-disbelieving tones in the corridors, in the dining hall, in the dormitories. The human girl, the quiet one, grew up on the deadliest planet in the index. For fun. Some of them started looking at her differently after that. Not with fear exactly, though there was some of that too. In quiet corners where nobody would admit it out loud. Mostly it was something closer to careful respect. The kind you give someone once you've learned they're carrying something you don't fully understand and probably shouldn't test. The silver blue-skinned student, whose name was Isilra, sought Mara out after classes ended for the day, catching up with her in the long transit corridor that connected the lecture halls to the residential wing. "I wanted to ask you something," Isilra said, falling into step beside her, back in the lecture. "You said your species learns all of that as children, the rivers, the storms, the animals." "Yeah. Were you ever afraid, growing up like that?" Mara thought about it honestly, the ease she'd carried through the whole lecture softening for just a moment into something a little more personal. "Sometimes," she admitted. "There were nights the wind would howl against the house, so hard I thought the roof was going to come off, and I'd lie there scared out of my mind, listening to it. There were times I'd be out in the woods and hear something moving in the brush, and my whole body would just lock up until I figured out what it was. Fear was part of it. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't." "Then how did you keep doing it? Going back out there, again and again?" Mara smiled, a small genuine thing, because being scared some of the time isn't the same as being ruled by it, she said. "You feel it, you respect it. You learn from it, and then you go back outside the next morning anyway, because that's still your home, storms and bears and rivers included. I think that's maybe the biggest difference between us and a lot of the galaxy. It's not that we don't feel fear. We just don't let it be the only thing deciding what our life looks like." Isilra was quiet for a moment, processing that. "I think," she said slowly, "that I understand now why your instructor looked the way he did by the end of that lecture." "Yeah," Mara said, laughing softly. "I got that a lot back home too, actually. People from calmer places hear about what an ordinary childhood was like where I grew up, and they get this look, somewhere between impressed and mildly terrified. I would say that is an accurate description of the entire lecture hall today." "Story of my life," Mara said. They walked together in easy silence for a while after that, the corridor humming softly with the distant sound of the station's systems, the stars outside the viewports drifting slow and steady and infinitely calm, utterly unlike the world Mara had left behind, the world that had shaped her, without her ever fully realizing just how strange that shaping would look to anyone standing outside of it. Word of the lecture eventually reached other instructors, other departments, and within a few weeks it had become something of a minor legend around the academy. The kind of story students repeated to newcomers on their first day, half warning and half fascination. There is a species out there, they'd say, that considers Earth's rivers and bears and storms to be a normal part of growing up. There's a girl in the survivability course who proved it, calm as anything, sitting in the back row like it was nothing at all. Vel Atherrow, for his part, kept his promise. The reading material for the following semester's course carried a new addendum, a small but significant one, attached to the entry on Earth. It didn't remove the warnings. It didn't erase the statistics, the 4% survival rate, the storms, the wildlife, the disease. All of that remained, because all of that remained true. But beneath it, in his own careful clicking prose, translated into the station's common tongue, he had added a single new note, one that would be read by every incoming student for cycles afterward. Long after Mara herself had graduated and moved on to whatever came next for a young woman who had grown up outrunning bears and riding out storms just for the joy of being alive in a dangerous world. The note reads simply, "Survivability assessments for this planet should account for the fact that its native population does not experience this environment as a threat, but as home. Approach with appropriate caution. Approach with appropriate respect. The two are not the same thing, and the distinction may prove critical to your survival should you ever be fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to meet one of them face to face." If you enjoyed this story, stick around because there are plenty more tales like it waiting for you. Stories of humanity being quietly, calmly, devastatingly more than the galaxy ever expected. Let me know in the comments what your favorite moment was, whether it was the bear story, the tornado chasers, or the look on that poor instructor's face by the end of the lecture. Give this video a like if you want more stories in this style, subscribe if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep your eyes on the stars, and maybe, just maybe, a little more respect for the quiet ones in the back row.